We aim to increase spending on climate solutions and to amplify the climate ecosystem by building the capacity of solution providers. Today, India is one of the youngest nations in the world, with more than 62% of its population in the working group from ages 15 to 59, and more than 54% of its total population below 25 years of age. It's estimated that the average age of the population in India by 2020 is 29 years, as against 40 years in the USA, 46 years in Europe, and 47 years in Japan. But the youth in India need support in terms of good health, education, training, as well as opportunity to transform the future. And at the same, we've seen tremendous advances in technology. Machine learning, artificial intelligence, all of these have really skyrocketed in the last few decades. And we've been able to create platforms and opportunities for the youth to build the future that India deserves. Although leveraging technology in emerging markets like India is often nuanced and quite complex, it is also important to recognize that the technological trends that break through this multifaceted landscape have enormous impact, from enabling scientists to accurately predict disease occurrence in rural areas, to increasing accessibility to education and dismantling heavily patriarchal societies. Technology has incredible potential. But what does sustainable technological development mean? Sustainability entails taking an approach that is inclusive, open, and diverse. It is inherently collaborative, and it aspires to use technology to empower and support people to meet and exceed their technology to create positive social impact, especially for those who need it the most. And so this evening, we have the privilege of hearing from some of India's foremost young leaders about this momentum, their journey towards building a resilient and progressive India, and the opportunities and challenges they see in using technologies for sustainable development. We will begin today with some opening remarks from our panelists. That will be followed by a moderated discussion, and then we're going to open it up to the audience for questions. So please do keep posting your questions and reflections in the chat box, and we will try to address them in our conversation. So let me introduce our first panelist for this evening, Mr. Neil Lalka. Neil is currently the Assistant Manager, Strategy and Operations at the Maharashtra State Innovation Society, Government of Maharashtra. A chartered accountant and a lawyer by training, Neil has completed his graduation and post-graduation in commerce from HR College of Commerce and Economics in Mumbai. And Neil was a part of the Maharashtra Chief Minister Fellowship Program. And in the last 2 years has been a part of the Maharashtra State Innovation Society, the nodal agency for startups in Maharashtra. Prior to joining the government, Neil has spent over 4 years as part of the Research and Real Estate Intelligence Services team at JLL India, a leading international property consultant firm. On the personal front, Neil is involved in mentoring the family-founded and run Maitri Group, which runs or helps in facilitating funds for the needy. When free, Neil can be found either reading, traveling, or cooking. So Neil, we're really happy to have you with us today. Over to you for your opening remarks.
Thank you, Shloka, for the warm introduction. Firstly, thank you to IMC for having me over for this amazing conference. The last few sessions, I've been a part of them, and they've been amazing. I represent the Maharashtra State Innovation Society here today. The Innovation Society is a small startup set up by the government of Maharashtra for startups and innovation in Maharashtra. We are set up under the aegis of the Department of Skill Development and Entrepreneurship. And our primary goal is to support startups and innovation in every way possible. As a Chief Minister Fellow, my experience largely revolved around policy making, but the past 2 years with the Innovation Society have taught me a lot about policy execution and why it's equally, if not more important than making a good policy on paper. The reason I chose to be a part of the Innovation Society and why I continue working towards this mission of empowering startups across the state is that I firmly believe that startups have a very, very important role to play in how the Indian economy pans out over the next few years. 2020, despite being such a bad year because of COVID and all the other issues we faced, still somehow India managed to produce 11 unicorns this year. For those not too familiar with the startup ecosystem, unicorns are firms which have generated a valuation of more than $1 billion. And working in the startup ecosystem on behalf of the government, you just can't have a single boring day. I mean, there's something new, something interesting to to evaluate every single day, and you need to figure out how to execute it in your scheme of things. We recently got a very interesting stat from the DPIT department of the Government of India, which overlooks the Startup India scheme. And what they said is that about each early stage startup in India creates an average of about 12 jobs. Uh, like Shloka mentioned, in the age of AI, ML, blockchain, and a lot of other things which mankind is not too familiar with. This does pose a solid challenge with respect to the job market, which lies ahead of us. However, historically, whenever there's automation which has happened, wherever mechanical jobs have been replaced with machines of any kind, there's also a significant number of other kind of jobs which have been created. So one school of thought, of course, says that for the every mechanical job which is lost to a machinery today, there will be a significant number of other jobs created as well, because finally, human judgment is something which is exclusive to humans. AI can, of course, take decisions for you, but then that will be limited to the kind of input data it receives, right? So I think these kind of technologies are just going to complement us better in solving a lot of the bigger problems which the world faces today.
Thanks, Neil. That was
Yeah.
really interesting. Sorry, was there more that you wanted to say?
No, go ahead, Shloka. That's fine.
Thanks, Neil. That was super interesting. I points on startup ecosystem are so interesting. I've got a bunch of questions for you later on, and I'm sure the audience does too. I actually did not realize that that each early stage startup creates on average 12 jobs, but that's a fascinating statistic. So we're going to come back to you on that. But I want to quickly introduce next panelist, Priya Samant. She is a change maker. She has tremendous working on the US presidential campaigns, as well as with thought leaders globally. And Priya has immersed herself and amassed deep experience in the areas of technology and innovation, social entrepreneurship, international business, emerging markets, impact of investment, women and youth empowerment, as well as films, government, and politics. Her third film, a documentary, My Home India, was listed and reviewed for the Oscars last year. Priya is an international speaker and has moderated panels for Caspian Week at the World Economic Forum as well as Horasis meetings. She's a member of 100 Women at Davos, the Digital Economist, the Dream Tank, as well as TEDx Beacon Street. She's been a speaker catalyst at Governor Dukakis, 3 times governor of Massachusetts, amongst many other globally renowned political leaders. And Priya was born and raised in Mumbai, India, and resides in the United States. Priya, thank you for being with us today. I know it's super early in the morning for you, which makes your presence here even more special. I'm going to hand it over to you for your opening comments.
Thank you so much, Luca. It's an honor to be part of this panel. I go back 20 years where I was a youth. I'm no longer a youth, but being with you, learning and sharing is what kind of gives me the ideas and the needs that are there in the current times that your generation is facing. So again, my name is Priya Samant. United States, Boston is my homeland, and India is my motherland. I was born and raised in Mumbai. And I came to the United States as a young immigrant, and the reality of being on a visa as an immigrant struck to me when the dot-com bust happened. I had some really life lessons early on in the start of my professional journey in this country. But as India is inclusive, so is the United States, is the land of opportunities. I learned, I had some failures, many successes, and here I'm today with what I've been doing. So from starting my career in the technology space, founding and running a social enterprise, working with the startups in the tech and innovation space. I have done it all in the cradle of modern America, which is the second name for Boston. And while doing that, I have always been actively involved in furthering social and political causes, and also very much involved with cost-based cinema, which is I'm very passionate about it, because I think the power of entertainment or the films and politics can really drive the change and raise awareness that's needed, especially with we being in a digital world now, with the COVID happening last year. Another thing is that I would like to share is very important, is that what I have learned is working with the youths globally is that when this COVID happened, they were the ones who were actually in the forefront of doing multiple things. So they were very actively involved. But they are the ones who are very much affected by it as well. So what I would urge is, for the government and the businesses is to, give more attention and the flow of investments in digital learning, so the skills, those kind of skills can be you know uh, given to the young people. But at the same time, what is very important that I have seen, it's not just in India or United States, but with the youths globally, is that the soft skills, they are very extremely important for them to have. I mean, everybody needs to have soft skills, but especially when the future, the nature of work, which is now changing, and it will remain same for a few years to go. That is extremely important. So with that being said, I will hold on for my thoughts for further discussion, but I'm very honored to be here, and thank you, Shloka, for having me.
Thanks so much, Priya. It was incredibly sort of insightful and interesting. Your career is absolutely fascinating. And I think your foray into cinema as a means of promoting dialogue and cross-cultural exchange is something, again, that we're going to come back to in a big way and discuss it very soon. But thank you for that. Sej, over to you for your comments. But before I do, just to introduce you to the audience, you're our final panelist for this session. But you are a thought leader in technology and sustainability, a graduate of Georgetown University. Sahej is an author, and his first book was a category bestseller on Amazon. That's something that I'm truly envious of. He's currently working in politics at the intersection of technology and policy, and he's also working on his second book at the moment. Sahej, I'm sure we're going to have many questions for you about what you're writing next. But over to you for your intro remarks.
Thank you so much for that warm introduction. And Neil and Priya, it was really nice to hear both of your opening statements. I look forward to the Q&A that will follow this discussion. So yeah, just a little bit about me briefly. I'm 22 years old. I wrote this book, The Extinction of the Price Tag, which is an Amazon category bestseller. I recently graduated from Georgetown University. And I think the broad theme we're supposed to be discussing today of sustainability and mobility is something that not only affects me as a young person, but I think is something that all of us, anyone whose fate is bound to this planet, can come to appreciate. And hopefully in this conversation, we'll be able to further some understanding on these issues. I think to begin, I would like to frame what I would like to say with the following premise, which is that I think if you're coming to this panel for answers to a lot of these really, really important questions, I think you've come to the wrong place. I think what we can provide, me, Neil, and Priya, is a little bit of guidance and a little bit of focus and clarity on what the right questions even are. And then it's up to young people all over the world and innovators, entrepreneurs, people who Neil works with, who Priya works with, to actually then take those questions and start to innovate so that we can actually come to a much more sustainable set of answers. And another thing I would like to briefly touch upon is this idea of what is India's role in the world. And as someone who's grown up abroad, I grew up in the United States. I've spent many summers in India. I'm frequently there. I think this is a really important question because the common conceit in the United States at the university level amongst venture capitalists like Peter Thiel is that there are two different worlds. There's the developing world and the developed world. And I would posit that this is actually not a very correct or helpful characterization of India's place in the world to come. Because the implicit assumption you're making when you describe a place like India as developing is that what India should do with the capital available to it in both the venture markets, in R&D in general, is to take the best ideas from the West and implement them so that you can reach the frontier. Basically, what you're arguing, if you believe in this developing versus developed theory, is that the West is developed, they have all the good ideas, and India and other countries should just copy those and use that to power growth. I would posit to you, though, that really nowhere on this planet is truly developed. There are a lot of areas on the frontier where the solutions we currently have just are not sustainable. I'll get into a few of those later in this talk, but I think this is a really, really fundamental difference between the common view that's held, especially in the West and especially amongst those who deploy capital in places like India, and I think how we need to be thinking about what India's role in the world is going to be. I think the innovations that are going to be most important are just as likely to come from India as they are from California, as they are from somewhere in Europe. And that's the mindset I think people in India should be having when thinking about and approaching some of these problems. And I think this developing versus developed theory is especially flawed because of this whole premise that just because right now your current infrastructure may be below another country doesn't mean you can't leapfrog. In other words, it shouldn't be that your goal to try and catch up. It should be to jump ahead. The old world had 1,000-year head start on the United States in terms of building roads. But after the invention of the automobile, it was the United States with its developments of the highway systems and paving new types of road innovations that ended up having the most sophisticated transportation infrastructure. It's not the case that you need to catch up to the developed world. It's the case that you need to leapfrog ahead, especially when a lot of our solutions on the frontier are just not presently sustainable. So how can India best leapfrog into the future? I think the key, and I think a lot of people have already touched on this in their speeches, is that we need to be focusing on fundamental science innovation. And this is where I think there's a big intersection with youth, which is another theme of this panel. Because I think a lot of new ideas aren't going to come from the consensus thinkers. In other words, if you're an expert, the truth of the matter is you're probably not going to be the person who's most likely to come up with a contrarian idea that's going to radically shift the status quo. And because of this, I think young people in general have a huge advantage in terms of thinking about the future because they have the ability through naivete or lack of experience or however you want to frame it to think from first principles, not to think of how things have always been, but how things can be. In other words, they're the ideal candidates for some of these leapfrog innovations. And so the question then becomes, in what areas is leapfrogging most viable in a place like India? Where should entrepreneurs in India or all over the world look to channel their efforts? And I would posit to you that there are two places, I think, that are particularly viable. The first is desalination. And the reason I bring up desalination is because all over the world, even in the United States and places like California, water scarcity is becoming a more and more pressing issue. It's not that the developed world has a solution to this either. And so this is a place where the frontier clearly isn't stable, clearly isn't sustainable. And just because India is behind perhaps on water rights or water management doesn't mean they can't leapfrog ahead, because the place where the developed world is not very sustainable. And I think desalination is going to be increasingly important. In the absence of desalination, in the absence of cheap water and opening up the oceans for consumption for human beings, I think we're going to see a world where more and more geopolitical conflict is going to be fueled by competition for water resources, where more and more people are going to go thirsty, and where more and more crops and farmers are going to be adversely affected. This is clearly not a place where the status quo can hold. The center cannot hold on this issue. And this is where I think entrepreneurs should be looking to come up with fundamental science innovation. And secondly, and lastly, I think an area that's very important is the area of carbon capture and green technology in general. Ultimately, the West does not have a solution to this problem of carbon emissions. I think the developed world is just as clueless as the developing world on this. And given this is the case, I think this is a place where India is just as likely to come up with a leapfrog solution as anywhere else. And so those are two of the areas I think that are most viable for leapfrogging. There may be many, many more others. I think these are two of the most pressing, especially when it comes to this idea of sustainability and mobility.
Thanks, Edge. I think you've sort of hit on so many interesting pieces or narratives in your opening remarks. There's a lot for us to dive into. I also love the framing that you just gave, the developed versus developing world. I think Hans Rosling actually refers to that a bit in his book Factfulness, because he talks about the fact that dividing the world into two misleading boxes between rich and poor completely distorts global proportions in people's minds. So I think that's a really important distinction that you just brought out. And I think also good ground for us to start our conversation. So we're going to move into the moderated discussion part of the conversation. I would, again, urge the audience, if you have questions for our panelists, please do type it into the chat box. We'd love to sort of bring you into this conversation as well. But Neil, I'm going to kick off with you actually for the first question for our discussion. Can you talk to us a little bit more about the work you're doing with the Maharashtra State Innovation Society? Specifically, how are you using this platform to break new ground in deploying solutions for more rapid, sustainable, and resource-efficient growth in India?
So Shloka, I'll talk about what is one of my favorite initiatives at the Innovation Society. It's called the Maharashtra Startup Week, and we've done 3 editions of it so far, 2018, 19, and 20. And the whole value proposition that MSINS brings to the table through this platform is that a government gets to experience what a disruptive/innovative startup has to offer. On the other hand, a early stage startup gets to gets to service the government as one of the first paying customers. What we essentially do is we shortlist 100 startups from across the country in sectors which are close to our hearts, like agriculture, healthcare, smart infra, mobility, waste management, sustainability. We invite them to pitch in front of a diverse panel, and 24 of these startups are eligible to get a work order from us of 15 lakhs each. Uh, these work orders are without the limitations of a traditional government tender, and these are facilitated and funded by the Innovation Society. To give you a sense of the kind of work which is done through these pilots, maybe I can use a few personal anecdotes. I would like to talk about a solution offered to us by OFI. This particular solution helps us conduct exams in areas which have zero internet connectivity. Uh, in the age of COVID, where most exams are either being done virtually or are going to be done virtually, this solution comes into play massively in areas which are inherently inaccessible and do not have internet. And as a pilot, we conducted this particular exam, the Common Entrance Test in Maharashtra, for over 25,000 students. This was conducted using this technology. We've also got something we've got a company called Saga Defense, which has developed a surface water cleaning drone. This particular drone, we piloted it during Ganesh Utsav in Pimpri Chinchwad. And you'll be happy to know that the drone, it's an autonomous drone controlled with a remote control, lithium-ion battery powered. And even a 5-year-old child can operate the drone. It's that easy to operate. The impact we made was that the drone managed to collect about 2 tons of waste in a matter of 5 days. Uh, we've got Niramai, which has helped us in early stage breast cancer screening across the state. Uh, we did a pilot with a company called Planis Technologies, which has built a underwater surveillance system through which we can ensure that our ports, pipelines, dams, etc., the kind of defects which exist underneath, and we can measure the amount of repairing which needs to be done. This particular pilot was conducted at the Bhatsa Dam, which is one of the largest dams in the state and supplies water to the city of Bombay. The entire 800-meter upstream face of the wall. A detailed surveillance was conducted using this autonomous vehicle, and the Water Resources Department got a report which clearly indicates at what location, what kind of defect exists, and what kind of repairing needs to be done. While the scale of these pilots might seem small to many because it's a 15 lakh work order at the end of the day, But I believe the kind of impact each of these pilots makes is amazing. Also, the ground we are trying to break here is that government typically does not have access to these kind of innovations. In their normal scheme of things, it is very difficult for a government officer to go out in the market and look for solutions like these. And considering the kind of processes and rules and regulations which exist, it's very difficult to onboard them as well. So this is exactly the problem statement which MSINS is trying to address through the Startup Week.
Thanks, Neil. It's really fascinating. And you actually also dipped into a little bit around some of the challenges that are currently facing startups in India, but we'll come back to you on that because we do want to explore that a bit
Sure.
more. Priya, next question is for you. Sticking with sort of the theme around sort of technological innovation, how has digitization really played a role in developing dialogue across cultures? We'd love to hear how you're using that as a platform to really sort of bring out the potential of Indian youth and expand cross-cultural exchange.
Sure. It's a really good question. So, see, digitization of information and its free access through internet has made Earth flat. Anyone with access to the connecting device like cell phone, has access to any information and connect with anywhere to anybody around the world. And at the same time, the number of ways to disseminate that information to a larger group has become incredibly easy. So, it's very fascinating to see how quickly the information can flow. So now what this has done is this has brought down the barriers that existed due to the lack of free information flow access around across regions and countries. And the access to the information is actually same if you're educated, if you're not, if you're rich, you're poor, male, female, really doesn't matter. It's the same all around the world. So the knowledge and understanding about other culture as has actually become a norm. See, you don't have to go to the libraries to understand the culture. So that is basically a very important, aspect what digitization has done across, for developing the dialogue across the cultures. But coming back to the youth, right? See, technology and the way the digital space has been used by the youths, it's phenomenal. Like I can give you one quick example is that I know we are pressing on the time because there's a limited dialogue that we can have here, but the power of social media, right? The way, I mean, I have a cousin who has started a social media group just to understand how the cultures work. And what they do is, people around the world, and it's a pretty large group given the time frame when it has started. People get around the world, they just discuss everything and anything under the sun, and what the knowledge that comes out of it is actually then used in their own personal and professional life. So this is just one small example of what it can do. So coming back to the Indian youth, see, our youth and youth in general, are very smart, and especially people, the younger generation of India is extremely smart. I will again stress on the point that, while they have access to the technology, and they know how to use it, what is important for them, which I personally see, which is lacking, is the soft skills. Okay, and I'm going to stress it again because Neil is runs startups, and he runs those programs around urban and rural demographics. Is that they need to have the soft skills in order to come on the global platform. Because my way, and we'll talk more about it, but my way of paying it forward, because I was very young when I came to the United States, is helping get the youths get those platforms internationally. But what I see them is they are phenomenal with their technical knowledge and the know of how things work, but when it comes to the soft skills is where there's a huge lack.
Thanks, Priya. I think that's super interesting and really helpful for all of us to understand. Again, lots of questions for you, and we're going to come back. But I'm going to ask Sahaj the next question, which is, Just if you can, when we were preparing for this panel, we had a really interesting conversation how you define technology, and it was quite different, especially when it comes to its role in building our future. And I was wondering if you could dive into that a little bit more. But as you do, could you also talk about, you mentioned this a bit in your opening address, but some of the key levers for addressing India's sustainability challenges? What are some of the key sort of areas and opportunities for using technology as a lever?
Yeah, so I'll answer the technology definition question first because I think it'll naturally flow into the second. Um, I think one of the things that more and more, I think, especially amongst young people, is a misconception is this idea of technology as a catch-all phrase. So if you look up like the textbook definition of technology, one of the ones you would find is technology is anything that means you do more with less, right? It's something that reduces the amount of input you need for a set level of output. And I mean, this applies to everything. Ultimately, a cell phone is technology, but so is a laptop, but so is a light bulb, but so is a car, but so is a plane, but so is a tap, but so is a pen. And any word that I feel like is such a catch-all word lends itself to misinterpretation. Often you get very disingenuous and misleading narratives associated with the word technology. One example I think that is particularly present is that technology is always getting better. It depends on what technology. I would posit that transportation technology, on the one hand, is actually hasn't been getting that much better. If you removed electric vehicles from the equation, it's not at all clear to me that transportation has been getting much better over the last 60 years. In fact, some might argue that it's gotten worse. In the year 2000, we had the Concorde, which was much faster than the planes we have today. There's a lot of areas in which technology has been actually very stagnant, but by using this catch-all phrase, you can cherry pick things like information technology, which has gotten much better, and then cross-apply it to places like sustainability, which actually hasn't gotten much better. In fact, has gotten much worse. And so I think you need to be really precise in the way you use that definition. Once you start to then drill down on these different areas of technology, I think the opportunities and the key levers naturally avail themselves to you. So in my opening address, I talked about desalination and carbon capture. I think if you bucket those together, what I'm really talking about is sustainability when it comes to natural resources. That's a place where a ton of entrepreneurs are already doing a lot of great work. I think a lot more work is needed. We can be moving much faster in terms of innovating in those areas, and it's much, much needed. In the absence of innovation in those areas, you're going to see all sorts of resource wars break out. You're going to see a tremendous amount of human casualty on a scale unprecedented since the world wars of the 20th century. Ultimately, these are the areas I think people need to be working most. Then what are the levers to move them? I think the levers are the same as with the previous innovations of the last 2 centuries, which is fundamental scientific innovation. I think we need new solutions. When it comes to desalination, things that people are doing right now and just improving it by 10 to 20% isn't going to be enough. And more and more, that's the sort of innovation that you're seeing in these sectors. We need an order of magnitude leapfrog in places like that, in places like carbon capture, green technology. No one even talks about things like nuclear fusion anymore. I think nuclear technology is another place where we've been incredibly stagnant. But through these misleading notions of technology always gets better as if it's on its own, I think we really mislead the youth. And I think that false narrative actually ends up affecting how youth end up investing their own time and resources in what they choose to pursue. So we need to be really clear about that. And ultimately, it's up to entrepreneurs and innovators to figure out exactly what the right leverage is, what the right mechanisms are to fix some of these problems. But we can only help them posit the right questions.
Thanks, Tej. That was super clear, and I think really, really well put in terms of sort of defining the conversation for today as well. I'm actually going to end with a quick question for each of you, just like a 10-second response. But if you had to define really quickly some of the biggest sort of challenges / opportunities that you think we're facing today as a nation, but where you think, again, there is tremendous opportunity. If you want to say a quick like sentence or two, that would be great in your respective areas, of course, or even more generally, whatever you feel um, strongly about. So Neil, perhaps we could start with you really quickly.
Speaking on behalf of the government, I would like to say that the opportunity lies in decriminalizing and deregulating innovation and empowering it to go forward.
Thanks, Neil. That's nicely put. Priya, over to you. Where do you feel is some of perhaps the greatest opportunity and, of course, challenge?
Well, from the opportunity perspective, of course, in the area of, and I'm going to talk with for the Indian diaspora that's in this place in the United States, as well as for the youths of India, because there's a lot of information exchange between the two. Is in the opportunities are in the area of of course entrepreneurship, and that goes across all the sectors, but there is also a lot of demand and the need in the public service sector. And I'm going to quickly quote, there's a really young girl of Indian origin, a Canadian citizen, who is running for the Secretary General post. And she said that, I'm going to quote her, that, youths have the visitation right, not the participation rights. So it's high time they also get the participation rights, because they can execute and implement.
That's really nicely put. I love that line. Youth have the visitation but not participation rights. That's fantastic. Serge, I know you've mentioned a number of opportunity areas. If you had to pick just one, where would you begin, or what would you go for first?
I would answer on a higher level. I would say the most important thing, the most important wisdom I think we can impart is ask the right questions, and be skeptical of a lot of the narratives that you're fed.
Those are definitely the most important and dynamic. And I think developing countries like India, because these tremendous provided their education, their health, and protect and guarantee their rights. So we can undoubtedly say that today's young are tomorrow's innovators, creators, and builders and leaders, judging from this conversation. I would really like to thank all three of our panelists, Neil, Priya, and Sahaj, for joining us and staying with us this afternoon. I know it's really late at night or early in the morning where you are, and I do really hope that this is the first of many conversations on the role of the youth empowering a new era of Indian growth and revitalization. Thank you to our audience and to the IMC Chamber and Commerce for Industry for this wonderful opportunity. And congratulations once again on this power packed performance. Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank you,
much.
Shloka. Thank you, MC.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for your valuable time. It was indeed a wonderful session. And I would also like to thank our panelists for your time, for your ideas, and for your insight on youth vision. Ladies and gentlemen, there is a lot more excitement left for the day. So I would request you all to be glued to your seats, to your computers and laptops so that you don't miss out on anything. And ladies and gentlemen, we would be starting our next session soon.